to.
Yeah. Okay, so this Saturday, a group of us are going out to the ICR Discovery Center. They're having an archaeology conference this Saturday. The doors will open at 8 o'clock. There will be a light breakfast, and the talks will run from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we will cover the ticket cost. You need to let us know by tonight. We're trying to get a final head count as soon as possible so that we can kind of finalize who's going and get their tickets covered. And
Count me in.
That sounds fun.
A few of us looking to go.
That's where Clint Loveness is. Isn't he working there?
Yeah, he's still working there.
We
Yeah.
so. Oh yeah.
And also, there's a lady that came to a couple of our recent talks from there as well.
Yeah. So yeah, Dr. Titus Kennedy is going to be one of the main speakers there. He's a major figure in Old Testament archaeology studies, and yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, he's super knowledgeable, really sharp young archaeologist. Should be good.
And I don't think we have any other announcements. We can go ahead and hand it on to Dr.
Justin Bass. All right.
All right. Probably unplug one less wire that I don't trip over. Don't need that. Great to see all of you. Good to be back. As you can see, I always like to bring a lot of books. I think my talk's around 40-something minutes, so maybe at the end have some time, any questions, and then I can share why I brought these books. They're basically all these books in some way contributed to this talk. So, and I'm, very passionate about church history, fascinated by how Christianity has dominated over the last 2,000 years. So, love hitting all those different angles, and so this is kind of more of a general, a big picture idea of how Christianity built Western civilization, and so a lot of these books have been key to helping me in that journey. 5 years ago, 2020, I wrote an article for the Gospel Coalition called "Why Western Intellectuals Are Dreaming Christian Dreams." And it's still a great article, by the way, so you can look it up. It's still really good. I'm still proud of it. But what I wanted to do, the reason why I was inspired to write it, was because, 2018, maybe going back to 2017, 2018, 2019, leading up to 2020, there was so many of these public figures not only talking about Christianity, but had converted to Christianity. So many public intellectuals were converting to Christianity that had been atheists for so long. And as many of y'all know, post 9/11, of course, it was a very different world. You had the new atheism. You had most public intellectuals that were anti-Christianity for a long time, all the way into the mid-2010s. And so this was, I thought, somewhat of a phenomenon going on. And so people here's some examples that I talked about in the article. Malcolm Gladwell, he's not real public about his faith, but when he talked about his David and Goliath book, which is actually really good. You can watch his, I think he does a TED Talk on it, which is really good. You can listen to that. But he talks about how that brought him back to his Christian faith. He grew up in a Christian household, and that brought him back. This guy up here you may not recognize, but A.N. Wilson. He has a fun story. He actually wrote some horrible books about Paul, about Jesus, about C.S. Lewis, and very terrible books. And he even debated N.T. Wright. He was just a real hardcore atheist. And then out of the blue, he becomes a Christian and has said some amazing things about the resurrection and just definitely a radical conversion. This is Anne Rice, the writer of The Vampire Chronicles, which became one of my favorite movies of all time, Interview with the Vampire, with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. And it shows the darkness in my soul. Even as a Christian, I still have such darkness in my soul because I love that movie. And she said that when she wrote those books that movie's based on, it was basically an expression of the darkness of her atheism. And then she had this radical conversion and became a Christian, and then wrote some books on Jesus before she died. She died a few years ago. And then the top right is Rodney Stark. Rodney Stark, 3 of the books here represented. I think one of the greatest authors on church history. And he actually came to Christ because of his study of the rise of Christianity and how dominant it became and how it came from Christ and all the rest. And then Andrew Klavan on the far right, you probably recognize him from the Daily Wire. He was a Jewish atheist until he was 49, and he converted. And he wrote a autobiography on that. I read that. It's really good. His story is really powerful. And then he's regularly putting out good stuff on Christianity. And then Jordan Peterson, when I wrote this, I didn't say he had converted. He was kind of he was an almost Christian, not far from the kingdom of God. He was a big part of this, I think, phenomenon that began at this time in the 2016, 2017 time. And so thankfully, God willing, he does seem like he's at least professing the resurrection. He's going to church. His wife has also been converted since then. So I hope he is in the kingdom. But now in 2025, I'm overjoyed because we can just keep adding to this list, right? We've had, just in the last few years, up here on the left, this is a conversation/debate between Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Richard Dawkins. And it's really good. You should watch it online if you haven't.
Watch that.
Yeah, watch that.
Time to discuss it.
Yeah, it's really good. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali, atheist. I loved her book, actually, Infidel, that she wrote, escaped out of Islam, but was friends and buddies with Richard Dawkins, especially Christopher Hitchens. He was like a mentor to her. And so she was buddies with all the new atheists. And she has had a radical conversion. And she's actually currently writing her memoir on why she converted. So she's going to say a lot more than what she said, like here and some articles and things. And this is David Brooks. He used to be a New York Times columnist, written some books. And he actually came to Christ through reading the classics and St. Augustine. And then there's Charles Murray. In his 80s, became a Christian. As I said, written a ton of books, very well known for a lot of things like on IQ and the history of Western civilization and things like that. But he wrote a book called Taking Religion Seriously that just came out. And he did a podcast with Michael Shermer, the atheist Michael Shermer. I highly recommend that. Shermer's pushing back against what he's saying, and it's really good, other than the fact that Murray's still a little pluralistic on salvation. But other than that, he does a great job defending at least the claims of Christ and the resurrection. And then this on the very far right is Paul Kingsnorth. He's a fascinating individual, also radical conversion. He was actually a Wiccan, actually like a witch, literally a high priest in the Wiccan religion. And he had this dream, he had these visions, and so look up his story. And he actually just came out with a book. I can't remember the title of it. So again, a lot of serious conversions happening just recently, and then some fun ones in Hollywood. Shia LaBeouf became Catholic not too long ago. Chris Pratt, Rob Schneider, you can do it! He actually became a strong Christian. Denzel Washington and Hulk Hogan both got baptized this year for the first time. Hulk Hogan was baptized like a month before he died. Kind of interesting. Russell Brand, who I used to despise that guy. His movies, his comedy, it was terrible. He's become this completely different Christian. He's actually pretty wise. He actually shares some pretty awesome stuff. He's reading C.S. Lewis. He's really had a radical conversion. And then even among intellectuals who still identify as atheist or agnostic, people like Douglas Murray, Michael Shermer, Alex O'Connor, Jonathan Haidt, Steven Pinker a little bit, but Yuval Noah Harari. These guys are regularly talking about Christianity. If you look at what they're talking about on their podcasts or when they're guests somewhere, they're almost always talking about Christ or the Bible or Christianity and politics or something in that discussion. And usually it's in a positive manner, which, like I said, is a 180 from the early 2000s to the mid-2010s. Even Richard Dawkins, the king of the new atheists, even Richard Dawkins, he recently called himself a cultural Christian, and he said, which doesn't really mean anything like real conversion, so let me make that clear. But he did say, I'm a cultural Christian, and my favorite is, he said, we need more bells ringing we need more church bells in England, and less, in fact, no minarets having the Islamic call to prayer. So he actually said that recently. He said, well, I want more church bells in my homeland. I don't want the Muslim call to prayer. And why do you think that's happening? He's a big part of that, even though he doesn't know that. And add to that some significant things happening with the younger generation. of recent times, really, again, since 2020. Barna has recently reported that church attendance has doubled throughout the West among Gen Z, and that's since 2020. And the trends that are all the trends that are being reported on is that this younger generation, Gen Z and younger, are trending towards Christianity, going to church in a upward manner, and that's the first time this has happened in like 30 years. It's always going down with the younger generations. But this is the first time that we're seeing it going up. And I have no doubt, I really am convinced that the assassination, the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk has accelerated this trend. I think that's been something that's it was already happening, I think, and he was a part of that. But I think it's been even accelerated because of what happened to him. That's just the power of Christian martyrs. So what's going on? As I said in my title of the talk, is this a third Great Awakening that, including myself, so many have prayed for? I've been actually praying for that for the West, for America, of course all over the world, but actually in other parts of the world Christianity is thriving, but it's been dying out in Europe and America. The trend been going downward, but been praying for that third Great Awakening, and maybe it's happening. I pray and hope it is. In fact, I studied the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening a lot. First Great Awakening was in the 1700s, solid. We're talking about Jonathan Edwards, we're talking about John Wesley, we're talking about George Whitefield, solid gospel preaching. The Second Great Awakening, not as good. Not just a little bit too much on emotions, a little bit too focused on emotionalism, and that's really what a lot of the churches across America especially have been heirs to, is more the Second Great Awakening, not the First Great Awakening. And then 20th century, God of course did mighty things, but people don't talk about a Great Awakening, at least in the West, in the 20th century, and maybe that's because there were over 100 million estimated slaughtered in 2 world wars and many attempted genocides. Maybe that's why the 20th century got skipped over, and maybe now in the 21st century we are having this third Great Awakening. I don't know. But it really just feels, and again, facts don't care about my feelings, but I have this it just feels as I am engaged in the culture and things, what's happening, I feel like what C.S. Lewis talks about in Surprised by Joy, his intellectual autobiography, highly recommend, by the way, so good. But he talks about how as he got closer and closer to becoming a Christian, a big part of it was everyone around him, his friends, the people he respected at Cambridge and Oxford, all the authors he was reading, whether classic or recent, they're all Christians. They were like closing in on him. The Christians were everywhere. And to use his own language, he said he found himself in the meshes of the net. The Holy Spirit was after him, the hound of heaven, and there was no escape. There was no escape. And my favorite metric of a spiritual awakening vibe shift towards Christianity is the fact, if you didn't know, you need to know, Joe Rogan is going to church every week. He is in Austin. He is going to a church every week. He's talked about this multiple times now over the last 6 months, and in very positive ways. And I can tell you, he's not my favorite podcast, but whenever he has a guest on, an interesting guest on, it's always really good. But I've been listening to him for years, and I can tell you, not too long ago, he was mocking Christianity. He was regularly arguing with guests that Christianity began as a mushroom drug cult. And he would mock the resurrection, the idea of a resurrection. And now he's regularly going viral for saying things like, we need Jesus. We need Jesus. And this is the one that of recent that he went viral for. He said this to a guest. He said, the difference between science and religion is that science only asks for one miracle. It wants you to believe in one miracle, the Big Bang. It's a great line because it really is true. And it's funny because people would be incredulous about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and yet they're convinced that the entire universe was smaller than the head of a pin, and for no reason that anybody's adequately explained to me makes sense. I'm sticking with Jesus on that one. Jesus makes more sense. I love that. Jesus does make more sense. It's that he was referring to somebody who had talked to him about you got to pick your miracle, right? God created it all, or it came from nothing. You can't have that miracle of coming from nothing. So what I want to do is, with our time, is spend some time focusing on a key aspect of Christianity that I think is contributing, maybe more than anything else. There are many different avenues going on. Many things have changed about the world since the 1700s, the 1800s. So this Great Awakening is fascinating because it truly is global in a way. Online, internet, social media, there's just so many things going towards it. And it's happening not just among evangelicals, it's happening with Catholics, it's happening with Orthodox, it's happening in many different streams of Christianity. But what I want to focus on is an aspect that just, again, the way, from my perspective, what I think is contributing to it right now the most is the fact that Christianity works. It works. It works for nations, for cultures, for individuals. To use Rogan as an example, he has said the main reason he started going to church, it wasn't intellectual arguments that got him there. It was because he has gotten to know Christians in Austin who are authentic and truly doing great work with the homeless there. So the Christians that he knows that are working with the homeless in Austin, he hasn't named them, but certain Christians are doing such good work there, that's impressed him, and he's like, man, there's something real about this. I want to go. It works. You're actually making a difference in these people's lives. You're actually making a difference, right? And so that's just one of many examples. Christianity built Western civilization. And paraphrasing Winston Churchill, it's by far the best of the bad civilizations out there. The true test of any worldview, I like to say, and many have said it this way, is it true and does it work? I think you have to have both. For a true worldview, for a true religion, it needs to be true, but it also needs to work. And you've heard me many of you have heard me give talks here before many times on why it's true, but tonight I'm focusing on why it works, okay? And some get all their news, today. I know this is a much more sophisticated group, but a lot of people get their news today, and maybe even everything that they consume from memes. And so in case you just need a meme that captures what I'm going to talk about, this captures basically my whole talk. Secular Western ethics being dragged up a mountain by 2,000 years of Christian morality. And once they get to the top, this is Steven Pinker at the top saying, look how far I've climbed. I'm not even tired. I love that. So yeah, I think so many of the young people today, and many of those I listed above, why are they coming to Christianity? What is this change? I think they are looking, especially since 2020, they are looking for a bulwark against the woke insanity of the last 10 years and against the invasion of the Islamic culture and ideas all across the West. And I think they also want a return to traditional morality, marriage, and family, where boys are boys and girls are girls. I think they're finding in Christianity an answer to all that. And you could add meaning and all the rest, but I think those are some of the big things that post-2020 really got a lot of people afraid and woke a lot of people up, and they said, whoa, okay, Christianity is what we need to fight against this. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a great example of this because when she first converted, like she shared in that talk with Dawkins, she was far more emphasizing her cultural reasons of becoming a Christian. I'm a cultural Christian, and we need Christianity to save Western, I'm talking as Hirsi Ali. We need Christianity to save Western civilization. We need Christianity as a bulwark against Islam. That was basically her main argument originally, but then she started saying, no, but I really do believe Jesus is the Son of God. I really do believe he resurrected, and I'm going to write a book on that. And like I said, she's doing that. In fact, she told Richard Dawkins, if you remember at that talk, my favorite line, she said, you believe in nothing, and therefore you offer the world nothing. I thought that was the best line of the night. And it's true. And thinking people, young people across the West are seeing the emptiness of atheism. They're seeing the evil practices, the evils of other religions, but also the emptiness of other religions. And they're looking around Western civilization. They're looking at the ancient churches. They're looking at those cathedrals, and they're saying, look what Christianity built. What hath God wrought? And where they've torn down, where civilizations have torn down the fence of Christianity, look what has arisen. Chaos, destruction, monstrous ideologies with blue hair and pronouns in their bio have arisen. So don't tear down the fence. If there's any lesson of the last 10 years, don't tear down the fence. Look up Chesterton's fence. Don't tear down the wall. In fact, I think the young people are saying, give me a brick, let's rebuild the cathedral. Let's rebuild the cathedral. Jesus said to his followers in the Sermon on the Mount, you are the light of the world. But we, followers of Jesus, are only the light of the world because he's the light of the world. He said in John, I am the light of the world. And just like the moon reflects the light of the sun, Christians reflect the light of Christ. In fact, consider this map of the world. It may be too small to be able to read, but basically in the gray, this is all the places on earth that publicly celebrate Christmas. So these are all the nations where there are going to be Christmas lights and Christmas trees and all kinds of things, maybe more commercialized, of course, but they celebrate Christmas, right? The darker spots are nations that either outright ban Christianity or just don't celebrate it. They might allow it, but they don't celebrate it as a nation. And it's not by accident that the countries that outlaw Christmas are some of the worst, most hellish places on earth. Outside of Christ is darkness, literally. Nations in Christ that exalt Christ are the light. In fact, if you narrowed this map down even more and said, okay, let's now just narrow it down to let's color in just the nations that not only were founded by Christians, but also had a Reformation post-Martin Luther. Those nations, guess what, are the first world, are what we call the first world. You hear about third world? The first world nations are those nations, the ones that had the Reformation and were founded by Christians originally. That, again, is not by accident. To paraphrase Maximus, he said, I've seen much of the rest of the world. It is brutal and cruel and dark. Rome is the light. But I'm ad-libbing for him. If he lived today, he would say, Christianity is the light. Maximus would travel the world, and he would say, you're right, Christianity is the light. And you want to know what the world would look like if Christ had never come and there was no Christianity and the Roman Empire just continued and everything just continued without Christianity? What would the world look like? Most of the world today would look like the parts of India that have not been westernized and where the Christians are not dominant. Meaning, it would be full of idols, it would be full of gods and goddesses, no human rights, a hierarchy of human value, a caste system with the rich and the powerful on top and the poor at the bottom. That's what the world, the vast majority of the world would look like. In fact, it's what the world looks like everywhere Christianity has not spread today. Christopher Hitchens had a subtitle to his book, if you remember, God is Not Great, How Religion, I think it's All Religions, or How Religions Spoil Everything or Poisons Everything. He's almost right. I think it's most religions poison everything, but not Christianity. In fact, another great book that I don't have with me, but I wanted to highlight, it's a well-done book, and I love the acronym. You know, Christians are weird, but Westerners are weird when it comes to all history, and it even comes to in the world today. Weird with this acronym. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. And those really aren't Christian virtues by themselves, but how did those things come about? They came about from Christian assumptions and principles and virtues. It was Christians who led the nations. It was decisions they made and things that they did that ultimately led to them being prosperous and educated and on, and democratic and free. Again, all these new converts, I think they're looking around at things like this, the nations that are founded this way, and saying, look what Christianity built. I want that. We need that. We need a return to that wisdom. Kind of an ad fontes to the sources. And then, what in Christianity, I want to look at it in two different ways. One, as Christianity spread, what evil practices did it end? And then also, what wonders did it bring into the world that didn't exist before? Okay, so I'm going to show you both. So what evil practices did Christianity end wherever it spread? And if you go back to the early church, I've done some, I think, talks on what happened in the early church. One of the things that is fascinating when you study the early Christians, they were the first to deal with the exposure, that's the ancient language of how they would talk about it, the exposure of children, meaning they would literally, there was abortion in the ancient world too, and the Christians were always against that. But this was literally a baby is born, and for whatever reason, the parents don't want it, usually because it's a girl or because it's disabled or whatever reason, they can't afford it, and they just go leave it somewhere outside. Whether it's in a trash heap or out in the woods or cast in the water, whatever, they just expose it. They just cast it out and let it die. Okay? The Christians were the first to actually go find those kids and take care of them and raise them. That's what the Christians did. And once the Christians became dominant, infanticide, this type of thing, was in no way allowed. This was not expected. This was not, there was a huge culture shift where families did not do this anymore. In fact, Tom Holland, not Spider-Man Tom Holland, this is this Tom Holland, the ancient historian Tom Holland, he made this great line. He had this great line. This is from when he was on a podcast. He said, "Most likely abandoned babies of the ancient world would just die and they would be flushed down into the drains. Archaeologists can generally tell the pre- and post-Christian period of a drainage system because pre-Christian they are littered with tiny bones, and post-Christian there are no bones. There are no bones when the Christians take over." Constantine actually is the one who ended one of the most brutal death penalties that ever existed, crucifixion. The gladiatorial games, it was a guy named Telemachus, Christian that jumped into the arena literally while two gladiators were fighting. And he said, "In the name of Christ, stop this. In the name of Christ." He kept repeating that, and they ultimately stabbed him to death. But the crowd was so impressed by this, and it ultimately got to the Christian emperor, that at that time, this was post-Constantine, you had a Christian emperor, and they ended the gladiatorial games by the end of the 4th century. And then, of course, as Christians from Europe, the explorers, as they came to the New World, what did Cortez and Pizarro, what did they find? They found human sacrifice in insane numbers. Cannibalism. They estimate at least millions of people were sacrificed, literally taken up to the top of those Aztec temples, and while they're alive, have their hearts ripped out of their chest, like Indiana Jones, like the Indiana Jones 2 movie. Literally ripping the heart out of the chest and then holding up to the sun for their bloodthirsty gods, demons. And I would say, these explorers, there's no doubt, they were sinners and they didn't do everything right. But stopping human sacrifice and cannibalism in the world, that was a good thing. That was a good thing. I think that was a very, very good thing. And then the big one, abolition of slavery. Slavery, of course, was done by every culture that could do it, every nation that could do it, from all the history of the world. Slavery was everywhere. There was not even a thought that you would end slavery, that there could be a world without slavery. We have no writings of anyone doing that. We have some early church fathers that definitely critiqued it and spoke about the evils of it. We have some people in the Middle Ages that did. But it really wasn't until the Quakers, which was a Christian movement in the 1500s, that post the Reformation, that they were a movement that specifically said, we're going to get rid of slavery. And through them, leading up to William Wilberforce in Britain, and to people like Frederick Douglass in America and other Christian abolitionists, they ultimately got rid of slavery. The transcendent love ethic of Jesus, love your neighbor as yourself, the golden rule, the Good Samaritan parable, these teachings of Jesus cannot coexist. They were already there in the New Testament, and they cannot coexist with slavery. And they finally, it took centuries, but they worked themselves out. And I love how Thomas Sowell, this great economist, he said it this way. He said, what was peculiar about the West was not that it participated in the worldwide evil of slavery, but that it later abolished that evil, not only in Western societies, but also in other societies subject to Western control or influence. This was possible only because the anti-slavery movement coincided with an era in which Western power and hegemony were at their zenith, so that it was essentially European imperialism which ended slavery. This idea might seem shocking, not because it does not fit the facts, but because it does not fit the prevailing vision of our time. He says things so well. Britain literally forced the Ottoman Muslims, kicking and screaming, to end slavery after they ended slavery. And today there's an estimated 27 million slaves still being bought and sold across Africa and the Middle East. Far more than during the transatlantic slave trade. So if the abolition of slavery had been left to Muslims, to Hindus, to Native Americans, to enlightened humanists, we'd still be waiting. We'd still be waiting. And what about wonders that Christianity brought into the world? Human rights. Anybody like human rights? Equality. You like that? That goes back to Genesis, right? Genesis 1:26 and 27. That we were made in God's image, male and female, equal before God, worth everything before God. Made in the image of God, made with souls, made to live forever. And Galatians 3:28, which is kind of a commentary on that. There is no male or female. There is no slave or free. There is no barbarian, Greek, Jew. Everyone is one in Christ Jesus, our Lord. And of course, that Genesis passage specifically is what Thomas Jefferson, the deist Thomas Jefferson, had in mind when he looked for and found those unalienable rights endowed by their Creator. Where did he find them? He found them in the God of Christianity, in the God of the Bible. That was the only place to find them. And I love the honesty of Yuval Noah Harari, wrote a book called Sapiens. He's an atheist, he's Jewish, but he's an atheist. And he just straight up says, there are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination of human beings. He explores this many times. He'll say, human rights are a made-up thing. It's just made up. Money's made up. And in a lot of ways, he's right. And if he's an atheist, he is right. All these things are just made up. But we got to do that so it works, is basically what he says. And he admits the Americans got the idea of equality from Christianity, which argues that every person has a divinely created soul and that all souls are equal before God. He says this is the best idea, it's worked, and Christians gave us that idea. The Bible gives us that idea. But according to him, it's just a made-up thing. It's not real. It's not real. We're just advanced apes, and there's no human rights. There's no significant value of humans in any way. But I love that he is honest. And to get this narrow it down to just the individual level, I love this little kid's book. I read this, I have a 3-year-old little girl, and so I read this to her. How much is a little girl worth? How much is a little girl worth? It's fun to think about, right? How much is a little girl worth in ancient Sparta? How much is a little girl worth in ancient Athens, in ancient Rome? How about in Islam? How about if she's born in the lower caste system of Hinduism? How much is a little girl worth? And then you ask, how much is a little girl worth in Christianity? Everything, right? She's priceless. Bought by the precious blood of Christ. You're only going to get that answer in Christianity. Some other things, you could do whole talks on these. I'm sure Alan's probably talked a lot about the scientific revolution and things like that, but hospitals, healthcare. You like hospitals? You like going to be able to go somewhere that takes care? We don't really like hospitals, but you really, trust me, you'd want them there if they didn't exist. Hospitals find their origin in Christian monasteries, specifically going back to the 4th century with Basil of Caesarea. They look at that as kind of the original kind of blueprint for what would later become what we call hospitals. It begins with Christian monasteries, and it begins with Christians who, again, were the first to focus on the sick and the suffering and to give them preferential treatment, not just to cast them out, let them die. Who cares if you're sick? No. Let's take them in. Let's help them. Again, inspired by Jesus' teachings and parables. In the ancient world, who took care of the abandoned children, searching for them in trash heaps? The Christians did. Even today, who cares for lepers? Who cares for the sick during plagues? If there's a huge natural disaster, who's running to help? It's World Vision, it's the Samaritan's Purse, it's the Red Cross, it's the Catholic Church, it's Texas Baptist Men, right? There's definitely some atheist organizations that help. There's some other religions that do these things now. But again, if you look at it throughout history, it was the Christians who first did this. And the people who did it later do it because of, I would say, Western Christian civilization has molded them to do that. And again, so scientific, technological, and economic revolutions all happening again within Christian Europe. The cosmos, the word cosmos means orderly. It's the same word that means order. And that again comes from Genesis. They believed that there was a God who created all things and he created it with order. So the great scientists like Kepler and Copernicus and Isaac Newton and Galileo, they wanted to think God's thoughts after him. And so that's why they sought. That's why they had this desire to learn and to discover the things in God's universe, because it really was there. It's not some illusion, right? C.S. Lewis said it best. He said, men became scientific because they expected law in nature. And they expected law in nature because they believed in a legislator. So why didn't the scientific revolution happen in Confucianist China or in Hindu India or the Islamic Middle East? It only happened in Christian Europe. I think that's because of the Christian assumptions. So we know the Christians became, especially by this time, restless adventurers, explorers of the heavens, of books, of the seas, of the markets. Capitalism arose within, again, Protestant Christian Europe. The pursuit of wealth and knowledge, this is how the West became weird. And finally, the unique Christian virtues given to the world by Christ. Humility, chastity, mercy, grace, forgiveness, faith, hope, love. Now, of course, other cultures, other religions, other people displayed these virtues in different places and different times. But the point is, these virtues, which would be on the top of most people's lists throughout the West, if they had to list what are the top virtues, that is a complete culture shift. That is turning the world upside down, because most of these virtues would in no way be on anybody's list from the ancient Greek, the Roman world, the barbarians, China. These would not be the top virtues that they would pick. And I would say the Christian element on these virtues, meaning the way Christ modeled these virtues, is what is truly unique, because those other cultures also do not have a Christ figure to show them what true forgiveness is or what true love is. Let me just focus on forgiveness to show you the unique Christian aspect of forgiveness. Alexander Pope said, "To err is human, to forgive is divine." Well, if to forgive is divine, to forgive your enemies is super divine. That's got to be super divine. And that's exactly what Jesus commanded us. He said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And when I study throughout church history, I'm fascinated by all the people who did this radical thing, inspired by Jesus. And just of recent times, you had Erica Kirk at the event of Charlie Kirk's funeral say that she forgives the murderer of her own husband. And she does it because Jesus has forgiven her. And of course, going back to someone like Corrie ten Boom during World War II, she was in a concentration camp with her sister, and this guard beat her and beat her sister. Her sister died in the camp. She got out. Later, that guard was somewhere where she was. The guard said, he's become a Christian now, asked her forgiveness, and she forgave him. And she forgave him. It's at the end of the great book she wrote, The Hiding Place. Martin Luther King, of course, told his people, the civil rights movement that followed him, don't fight back. Forgive. Turn the other cheek, literally. They would literally get spit in the face, and they would turn the other cheek. Nobody fought back. And again, he did that all because of what Christ commanded. And then the Amish. Again, the Amish forgiveness became even a phrase in our culture now, because it was in the 2000s, a guy went into a Amish elementary school and shot up a bunch of kids. And the Amish immediately publicly forgave them and even went to his funeral and was consoling the widow of the man who shot their own children. That's, Buddhists don't do that. Atheists don't do that. This is a transcendent, Christ-like forgiveness. And again, where does it come from? It goes all the way back to the man on the middle cross who said to his mockers and murderers, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." And as I've studied it, I'm absolutely convinced that the evidence shows nobody before Jesus ever, not forgive, but forgave their enemies and loved their enemies. No one said that and did that before Jesus, and everyone after him that did that did it because they were inspired by Jesus. In fact, bringing up Christopher Hitchens again, I loved his challenge that he would bring in a lot of his debates. He would always tell the Christian, he would say, "Tell me something I, an atheist, can't do that you, a Christian, can do." And he would regularly do that, and I didn't like a lot of the ways Christians would handle that. They didn't really answer that well. But one time, a Christian said to him, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." And he said, "All right, I agree with that one, because he said, I can't forgive my enemies and I won't forgive my enemies." So he said, "You're right, I won't." But he didn't count it because he thought forgiving your enemies was actually a sin itself, like what was immoral. But he that got him. He was like, okay, that's an answer, right? And that is a true answer. That's something a Christian can do that's no one outside of Christianity really, at least we don't see them doing. Jesus said the wise man builds his house on bedrock on a solid foundation. This also goes for the wise civilization. Western civilization is built on Jesus, his teachings, his exquisitely beautiful life, his sufferings, his death and resurrection. The best, of course, of Western civilization. When they've gone astray from Jesus, that's when it's led to disaster. But Christ and his ideas are not meant only for the West, they're meant for the whole world. And let me close with the bedrock foundation of Jesus' teachings from the Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount. This is the sermon that made really our world. It's the true transvaluation of values, to use Nietzsche's term. Jesus opens it by saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." He's saying this in the midst of the mighty Roman Empire, right? The Caesars at that time would have said, "Blessed are the mighty. Blessed are the powerful. Blessed are the conquerors. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, the mighty legions of the empire." That's what they valued. But Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek." Humility, not power, is the highest virtue and the beginning step of entrance into the kingdom of God. And now again, the vast majority of the world would agree with Jesus over the Caesars. And he goes on to say, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Again, the merciful. Mercy. Mercy to the poor, to the widow, to the orphan. This was not something that was valued or done before the Christians. The Christians built virtually all the places of mercy across the world. And where great peace is happening, it's usually been done by Christians. In fact, we have empirical data for that. There's a book called 100 Years of Nobel Peace Prizes. And in that book, I have the book, in that book, it divides up all the people who won the Nobel Peace Prize by religion. And as you can see, 80% of the Nobel Peace Prizes have been given to Christians. The true remnant of Christianity, those who truly follow Jesus' example, are the light of the world. Christianity works. Look what it built. And it works, guess why? Because it's true. Because it's true. A hoax wouldn't work like this. A fantasy wouldn't work like this. A fairy tale wouldn't work like this. It works because it's true. And you want evidence for that it's true? You got to get my book, The Bedrock of Christianity. Ayaan Hirsi Ali said to Richard Dawkins, "You believe in nothing, and therefore you offer the world nothing." The Third Great Awakening is a result, or will be a result, of Christians saying to the world, we believe and have Christ, and therefore we offer him to the world. And if we want to be a part of this Third Great Awakening, we must proclaim Christ and him crucified and risen again, offer him to the world, and then watch the streams of living water follow in his wake. We must live out the Sermon on the Mount. I encourage you to memorize it. Hard to find a better place in Scripture to devote time to try to memorize. We must walk as Jesus did. Thanks. Any questions, comments? Seth?
I was just gonna ask about the chart up there right now. Sort of like, one, could this be influenced by like the selection process for Nobel Peace Prize, that maybe they, pick people who are Christian more? Like, yeah, what I'm saying is, like, could there be like other factors going into this?
Could be. Yeah. Probably in the last, you could argue at least in the last maybe 20 to 30 years, that's when they've been, it's a big thing to try to, make sure and not just pick Westerners, pick people from international. So.
But, and I was also gonna say, if we like take it, this is just like the number of people in different religions from the 100 years of Nobel Prize, right?
Right.
Like if this were to be divided by the number of adherents to those religions, I feel like Judaism would be like most of it, or like the much largest total, just because
What's
a pretty good slice of that, and there are very few. Like
Hinduism definitely is disproportionately represented.
Yes,
very
and in other Nobel Prizes, not the peace one, but in the other ones, the Jews are always like 50-60%. Yeah, so they're very overrepresented, which is, I think, again showing that they're God's people. They have this amazing blessing upon them, but.
The impact of the Jews, though, ties in with Christianity, too. So
Of course,
there is
yeah.
that.
And pretty much everything I said, other than the spread, because Judaism didn't really spread, but all the things about the value of the value of a little girl, the value of, that would all be true for Jews as well, because they have the Old Testament. But
Yeah. What about ending slavery? Wasn't there a period of time before 1000 where Christians did sort of eradicate slavery, and then it came back or something? What do you
that
think
is
about
true.
that?
They had serfs, and it was better, but it still was. I think it's still that kind of same system. It was still kind of that still institution of slavery, just on a little bit better, especially if the Christians were living like Christians when they had them. But it still had a system, a system where indentured servants would be another way. Best case scenario, it was indentured servants. Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine that they had a ton of, independence, and especially if they had like the guy that was, they were working for wasn't a nice guy, still sell their children off or something. But it was better.
I think they did do some things toward ending some slave trade and whatnot, but yeah, it was kind of a poor era as well, which probably made it harder to not have some kind of servitude at times.
Yeah. But it shows that they were feeling the weight of, truly owning someone like property. That they knew from the scriptures then that was wrong. And that's why you do get a lot of church fathers railing against it.
Yeah.
Early on.
Of your books up there, which one would you recommend most to read?
Yeah, so that was I was hoping you'd ask that. I'd say Dominion. Yeah, I know it's the big one, but it's audio. The audiobook's great. You can listen to it on audiobook, so a way to get around it. But if you want a smaller one, I think the Rodney Stark. I think these two are the two best that give you kind of a long, very detailed, story of how Christianity was at the root of all Western expansion kind of thing.
Another good one is the Mangalwadi book, Vishal Mangalwadi.
Oh yeah, that is good. Yeah, that one's on
Book That Made Your
the
World.
book that made your world. That's all. Yeah, it shows the Bible and how the Bible has influenced the West so significantly. Yeah, it's a
And
great.
he really speaks
his
to how India was transformed in all these positive ways by Christianity.
yeah, for sure. I
Not
think
just the West.
we could see. Well, that's what's so cool is we have the story, and that's the thing. It's ideas, right? It's not. It could have been the Chinese that did all this, or it could have been Africans who did all this. It's all about who got the ideas. It's
Yeah.
all about who got the training, who got the wisdom, who got the, that's what it's about, right? It just happened to be, through these Anglo-Saxons and this kind of area of Rome and all that, where the barbarians took over, and then they became Christian, and the Vikings took over, and then they became Christian, and then this became Europe. So, but exactly, and that's what's happening.
The transformation of the Vikings from what they were.
It's amazing.
Now people look at the Scandinavian countries as this
I know.
very peaceful area.
And but like I said, in China and South Korea and places of South America, Christianity, that's where it's exploding numbers-wise, and it's been for a while now. So these numbers of things happening in the West, if they prove true, that's a new development. Because the West has been going downward for a long time.
There's 600 million Christians in Africa now.
Yeah.
It's really,
Half of Africa, like almost half of Africa. And and that's where the persecution is, one of the places where it's the highest.
President Trump threatens to send troops
Yep.
to Nigeria to stop
Yep.
the Christian slaughter.
Yep. This is a good example of the seeds of Christianity still being in the power of the most powerful Western nation, and maybe using that power for good,
Yeah.
stopping people from Muslims from slaughtering Christians in Nigeria, which I think is a great use of government power.
Actually, there's
I
slaughtering a
fully
lot of
support
Muslims
that.
there too. If
Yeah,
they're not,
there's-
they're not going
exactly.
with the
Stop them
radical
from
ones.
slaughtering anyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just stop them from slaughtering people. That was Bill Clinton, one of his biggest regrets, he said, about the Rwanda massacre,
Oh,
because
he
he
put it
had the troops there, and
put
he
it
he pulled them out, and he knew that,
Oh, I didn't know
because
that.
they could have easily stopped them. These are a bunch of people with machetes, and
Right.
our troops,
Wow.
all had their
Oh, I didn't
guns,
know that.
so they could have easily stopped it.
Yeah.
And you should watch the movie Hotel Rwanda. It stars Don Cheadle, and it's a well done movie. But it shows you the horror. It's the worst scene because it shows all these American tourists and the soldiers leave, and right as they leave, they show up with the machetes and just start hacking them up. Yeah. So I think that's a Romans 13. It's a good use of government power to stop evil.
So you
Yeah,
mentioned
so
the
the-
Dominion book. Could you want to expand a little bit on Tom Holland? You
Yeah, so-
referenced him a little bit, but he's got an.
He's also one, I should have added him to the conversion list too, because he's one that has
Has he
truly
converted?
become Anglican. Yeah, he's Anglican now. And again, it was because of his study of Christianity. But he started out as mainly a ancient Roman historian. So he has like a trilogy book on Julius Caesar and that whole era. And he's got a book on Islam. And then he started focusing on Christianity. And this book has become bestseller because he's just a really good writer, and he just basically takes you from Christ all the way to modern day and shows how even, like, for example, the Me Too movement and the whole woke stuff, all this is actually is still a Christian. They're still using Christian ideas and Christian assumptions for the reasoning why they're arguing what they're arguing, so without even knowing it. So it's really well written.
I hadn't heard
Yeah.
that he actually converted. You're sure he's not just like going to church?
That's what I've been
and-
told. Justin Briley told me this.
Kind of like a
Wow,
rainbow.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, he's not.
He seemed really close.
He does.
for a
He
while.
does annoy me because, like, he was on Conan O'Brien's podcast recently, and he had this opportunity where he could have easily shared the
Oh.
gospel, but he didn't. And so it's like, so he's not outspoken,
No wonder. Okay.
but he behind the scenes, he's definitely.
Yeah.
And when they ask
Seemed
him
like
straight,
He was on that path.
yeah. According to Justin Briley, he
would
is
know.
converted.
He would know. Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah, the like Pinker, Sapiens, and yeah, all four of these are all still by atheists. And Pinker's one of the people who would argue against what I've shared, because he's one of the people that tries to argue for, no, all these good things that we have today, the weird is from the Enlightenment. That's one of his points from the book. He wants to try to say, and that's the whole.
Was more by Christians.
Well, that's the
Influences,
and
right?
that's the whole Simpsons meme.
Yeah.
That's the Simpsons meme. You see, because you just like suddenly in the 1700s, there's nothing happened before that got us there. Like suddenly we're just there and we have these values all over Europe. But Jonathan Haidt's really good. You know, he's been doing a lot, and he's argued. He's kind of like a Benjamin Franklin, like, we need churches, we need Christianity. I don't believe it, but we need it.
Yeah.
It's really good for everyone. He's an atheist, but he literally, that's what he's arguing. That's what he's said. And then Douglas Murray, same thing. If you read Douglas Murray, you know, he wrote The Madness of Crowds, The Strange Death of Europe, The War on the West is his most recent book. Or he wrote a book on Israel recently. But he says the same thing. He wants Christianity to be.
He's so knowledgeable.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
It's amazing to realize, yeah, they're coming from this whole different perspective, but they know so much history. They have to admit the influence of Christ.
It's really so some of them, not, yeah, Pinker, of all these, yeah, and Harari, he's definitely not. He's speaking that it's working, but he's not pro-Christianity. Yeah. But Murray and Haidt, you know, you could see them come to Christ too.
But most of Stark's books he wrote before he converted, I think.
That's right.
So
that's what I heard.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, his book's great. I mean, even I actually haven't read this one. How Monotheism Led to the Reformation, Science, Witch Hunts, and the End of Slavery. I mean, just, you know, he's documenting all that, you know. But this one I read right before this talk, and it's really great.
Well, good stuff.
And get how much is Logar worth? She's another one though. The author, y'all heard of her? She's the one that she was part of that horrific scandal with the abuse from what was his name? What was his name? I forgot his name, but anyways, that coach, he had like basically raped, molested all these girls that were gymnasts, and she was one of them. And at the trial, she publicly gave this amazing. Also, she shared the gospel and forgave him publicly, and it was very powerful.